The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Whitmore suite, casting golden lines across the floor. The room was silent, save for the occasional beep of the heart monitor and the low hum of medical machines. The flowers on the bedside table had begun to wilt, untouched and unnoticed. Emily Carter stepped inside with a gentle knock, though she knew no one would answer. The nurses called it a habit of hers, knocking even when there was no consciousness to receive it. It was her way of keeping the patient human, not a case. She glanced at the woman lying still in the hospital bed. Sarah Whitmore, heiress to one of the wealthiest family fortunes in the state, former philanthropist, art collector, and a name that once turned heads at every gala. Now, she was a fading shadow wrapped in white sheets, lost in a coma for nearly 7 months. Emily checked the chart, her brows furrowing at a small change in medication dosage. She made a quick note, then pulled on gloves, preparing to change the dressing on Sarah's arm, where an IV line had left a mark of irritation. Her movements were precise, but unhurried. She worked with care, as if Sarah might feel every touch, even if she couldn't respond. As she cleaned the skin and placed the fresh gauze, Emily's mind drifted. Her grandmother used to say, "Even the silent ones are listening." She finished the dressing and instinctively reached out, her fingers wrapping lightly around Sarah's hand. It was something she did with many of her patients, a quiet connection. Most would think it pointless, but Emily believed presence mattered. That's when she heard it, barely audible, like the rustling of dry leaves. "My daughter!" Emily froze. The sound had come from the bed, from Sarah. But when she looked at the monitor, the patterns hadn't changed. Heart rate steady, brain activity still low. She leaned in, staring at the still face. "Did you say something?" she whispered. No response. The room was silent again. Emily looked around. No one else was there. No speakers on, no television, just her and Sarah. And that voice. She stepped back slowly, heart thudding, unsure if she'd imagined it. But something had shifted in the room. A weight she hadn't noticed before was now pressing gently against her chest, as if a presence had stirred. Emily glanced down at Sarah's hand still resting in hers. "My daughter." The words replayed in her mind, soft and raw. Impossible. Or not? She gently pulled her hand away, eyes still fixed on Sarah. That night, Emily didn't sleep, not because of the voice, but because, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder about something she had long buried. Who was her mother? The next morning, Emily stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her toothbrush idle in her hand, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. Her reflection looked normal, slightly tired, a little pale, nothing out of the ordinary. But something was different behind her eyes. A flicker of something old, forgotten, stirring. "My daughter." The voice echoed again, not in her ears, but somewhere deeper. A whisper tangled in memory. She spit out the toothpaste and rinsed, gripping the edges of the sink for a second longer than usual. It wasn't just what Sarah had said, it was how she'd said it. Soft, aching, like a confession. Or maybe a call. Later that day, after her shift ended, Emily took the long way home, a habit she had when her thoughts became too loud. Her route curved past the neighborhood where she'd grown up with her grandmother, Margaret. The small white house, with the peeling shutters, still stood at the corner of Pine and Elms, almost exactly as she remembered it. She parked across the street and stared. The memories came uninvited. Margaret at the kitchen table, reading aloud from old poetry books. Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor, pretending not to listen but catching every word. The smell of vanilla and dust, the humming sound of the old ceiling fan in summer, and Margaret's voice, clear as if she were sitting beside her now. "Your mother couldn't keep you, baby. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you." Emily had never believed that. Not really. She'd assumed it was something people said to soften the truth. She was abandoned at the hospital the day she was born. No note, no name. Just a tiny baby, wrapped in a worn flannel blanket. The nurses called her Hope for the first 24 hours until Child Services stepped in. Margaret had been the night nurse on duty. 60 years old and alone, she had taken one look at Emily and said, "She's mine." Against all odds, she adopted her, gave her a home, a name, a life. But she never spoke about the mother again, except in quiet moments when Emily was too sad to ask and too curious to forget. Now, standing outside the house she hadn't visited in nearly 2 years, Emily found herself whispering aloud, "Did you know? Was she someone real?" No one answered. She turned away before the ache in her throat became tears. Back in her apartment, she pulled out an old wooden box from the closet, her Margaret box. Inside were mementos, photos, birthday cards, a charm bracelet with a single heart-shaped bead. At the very bottom, folded and worn, was the discharge slip from the hospital the day Margaret brought her home. Infant, female, unnamed, found, January 14th, 1995. No mention of the mother, no leads, just an absence where a beginning should have been. Emily sat on the floor, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Maybe it had been a dream, a trick of the mind. But what if it wasn't? What if Sarah Whitmore wasn't just another patient? What if that single whisper had cracked open something real? Emily stood at the nurse's station, pretending to review a file as her eyes drifted toward room 614. The door was closed, as always. Inside, Sarah Whitmore slept, if sleep was even the right word for it. Her coma was deep and unyielding, and yet, my daughter. It wouldn't stop playing in Emily's mind, like a song stuck on a loop. She'd looked for logical explanations. Maybe Sarah had murmured something else. Maybe it was just the monitor, or her imagination, or exhaustion. But her gut said otherwise, and her gut rarely lied. "Carter," Dr. Patel called across the station, breaking her trance. "You've got 2 post-ops in ICU and consults in the ER." "On it," she replied, grabbing the tablet. But before heading off, her eyes flicked once more toward 614. Later that evening, her curiosity got the better of her. When the floor quieted and her tasks were done, Emily logged into the hospital records system from a terminal near the staff lounge. The room was empty, except for the low hum of a vending machine and the flicker of fluorescent lights overhead. She typed Sarah Whitmore into the search bar. The basic medical file loaded instantly. Age 63, history of hypertension, stroke-induced coma, no next of kin. She scrolled. No spouse listed, no siblings, no children. But then, buried in the notes under previous admissions, was a curious entry dated January 1995. It mentioned an emergency admittance for abdominal trauma and premature labor complications. Emily's heart skipped. That was the same month and year she was born. She clicked into it. The notes were sparse, likely a scanned file from old paper records. It confirmed that Sarah Whitmore had been admitted under her maiden name, Sarah Ellis, for a premature delivery. Baby, female. Outcome, stillborn. Stillborn? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She double-checked the birth date. January 14th, the same date on her discharge papers. Same hospital. Her pulse quickened. She leaned back, the air suddenly thicker in her lungs. Could there have been a mistake? Or something worse? Adoption records were notoriously sealed in the state, especially when no biological parent was listed. But if there had been a cover-up, or if the baby hadn't actually died? Emily closed the file quickly, nerves buzzing. She didn't know what to believe yet, but she knew what she felt. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a pull, a thread tugging her back to something unfinished, something buried beneath years of silence and systems and secrets. As she walked past room 614 again, she paused. Sarah lay still, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The same rhythm as before, but now the space between them felt charged. No longer sterile, no longer routine. It felt personal. Emily didn't go in. She didn't touch her hand, but she whispered softly through the door, "Who are you?" And in her chest, she wondered, or maybe, who am I? The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her. Not physically, emotionally, psychologically. The kind of shift you don't see in a mirror, but you feel in the weight of your breath. She hadn't told anyone. Not about the whisper. Not about the file she'd found. Not about the date that matched her own birth. It felt too fragile, too dreamlike to say out loud, but she needed answers. Between rounds, she visited the hospital's archives, a dull room in the sublevel, full of file cabinets and scanned documents dating back decades. She knew most records were digital now, but older files were still being transferred from paper. She spoke with Rita, the records supervisor, a woman in her 50s who wore glasses on the tip of her nose and carried a permanent look of suspicion. "I'm looking for supplemental notes from January 1995. Obstetrics floor. There might have been a transfer from a Sarah Ellis, maiden name Whitmore." Rita narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Emily gave a rehearsed shrug. "Possible case overlap. I just want to be thorough." It was weak, but Rita bought it. Barely. "Good luck," she muttered, handing her a digital tablet linked to the archive system. "Search by date, not name. Half those files are misfiled or half-scanned." Emily sat at the metal desk near the back, scrolling through entries one by one. Most were routine births, complications, C-sections. Then she found it. Ellis, Sarah, January 13th, 1995. Diagnosis: placental abruption, emergency cesarean. Neonate declared deceased at 11:48 p.m. But there was something odd. Attached to the file was a scanned incident report with a single red-stamped word: internal review. Emily's stomach dropped. She opened the attached document. The text was grainy, and parts had been redacted, but she could make out fragments. Discrepancy noted in neonatal status. Infant presumed deceased, but signs of respiration documented by attending nurse. Review halted due to unexplained disappearance of the neonate from the unit. She stopped breathing. The baby didn't die. The baby disappeared. A wave of nausea hit her. She steadied herself against the desk. There was only one person she knew who had been working that night. The same woman who found her. The woman who raised her. Margaret Carter. Her grandmother hadn't stolen a child. She'd rescued one. Emily had always believed Margaret had adopted her through legal channels. But now, maybe Margaret was the legal channel. Maybe she had seen what no one else did, that the baby was alive, and somehow nobody came back for her. Or maybe someone did, and the system failed. Emily's hands were trembling. She downloaded a copy of the report to a secure flash drive and returned the tablet to Rita without a word. Her heart was pounding like a war drum as she made her way back upstairs. Everything suddenly felt unreal. Her entire life might have begun in a lie, and the woman sleeping in room 614 might not be just a patient. She might be a missing piece of a broken timeline. A mother who was told her baby had died, or a mother who was told to forget. Emily found herself outside Sarah's room again. She didn't go in right away. She just stood there, watching the light shift across the floor. Was it possible? Was she the daughter Sarah had whispered about? She remembered a night when she was 12, asking Margaret if her real mother might still be out there. Margaret had kissed the top of her head and whispered, "If she is, she's thinking of you every day." Emily never asked again. Now, all those words felt like signposts she hadn't noticed, until they started pointing back here. She pressed her hand gently against the glass of the room's window. Sarah lay motionless inside, but Emily swore. For just a second, she saw the corner of the woman's mouth twitch. She didn't believe in signs, but maybe this one had been waiting for her all along. The hallway lights flickered as Emily walked slowly toward room 614. It was nearly midnight. The floor was quiet, wrapped in the hush that only came after visiting hours. Most of the staff had clocked out. Only the overnight team remained, scattered like ghosts across the ward. Emily paused at Sarah's door. Her hand hovered above the knob for a moment before she pushed it open. The room was dim, lit only by the monitor glow and the moonlight sliding through the blinds. Sarah lay still in bed, her skin pale but peaceful. Emily stepped closer, her heart thudding harder with every step. She sat down quietly in the chair beside her, hands folded in her lap. "I read your file," she said softly. "January 14th, 1995. You delivered a baby girl. They said she was stillborn, but she wasn't." She hesitated, unsure if she was confessing or accusing. "They never listed a name, but I was found that same night, in the same hospital. Margaret took me home, raised me. The only sound in the room was the steady beep of the heart monitor." Emily let out a breath. "I think you're my mother." She didn't expect a response. She didn't even expect clarity. All she wanted was to say it, to give shape to the ache that had been forming in her chest since that whisper. Then something shifted. A flicker, a blink. Emily froze. Sarah's eyelids moved again, slowly, struggling, then opened. Her eyes, pale blue, rimmed with confusion, locked onto Emily. At first, they were glassy, unfocused, but then they seemed to recognize, to see. A single tear slipped down Sarah's temple. Emily stood quickly. "Can you hear me?" Sarah's lips trembled, her mouth trying to form a word. It took everything in her just to say it. Her voice was a rasp of breath and memory. "You..." Her eyes didn't move from Emily's face. There was no panic, no fear, only recognition. "I knew," she whispered, barely audible. "I'd see you again." Emily's breath caught. "I'm Emily," she said, voice shaking. "Emily Carter." Sarah's gaze didn't shift. Her hand, weak and trembling, moved ever so slightly. Emily reached out and took it gently. She could feel it, barely, the pressure of Sarah's fingers curling into hers. And in that simple contact, something unspoken passed between them. 1,000 unsaid words, years lost, a mother's ache, a daughter's longing. There was no confirmation, no test results, just the unmistakable truth of two people who had lived with the absence of each other for too long. They didn't cry, not yet. They just looked and remembered. The news spread quickly across the floor the next morning. Sarah Whitmore had woken up. Nurses whispered in clusters by the water cooler. Doctors exchanged surprised glances. A coma patient coming back after 7 months was rare. But Emily knew it wasn't just a medical miracle. It was something else. Something heavier, older. A reunion buried beneath years of silence. Sarah was too weak to speak more than a few words at a time, but her eyes followed Emily now with intention and trust. Emily sat by her bedside through most of the day, gently holding her hand when Sarah's breathing grew shallow or when the machines clicked with unfamiliar sounds. The doctors called it a slow cognitive return. But to Emily, it felt more like watching a soul come home. Later that evening, Emily found herself standing outside Margaret's old bedroom in the little white house on Pine and Elms. She'd used the spare key hidden under the porch brick, just like she used to as a teenager sneaking home past curfew. The house smelled like old wood and lavender. Dust blanketed the corners. Margaret had passed 2 years ago, and Emily hadn't returned since. But something told her that answers lived here. She walked to the old dresser beside the bed, Margaret's drawer of keepsakes. Inside, beneath folded scarves and brittle postcards, she found a stack of envelopes bound with a red ribbon. Some were addressed to Emily, birthday cards she remembered, but one envelope stood out, yellowed with age, unsealed, and addressed in soft cursive, "To Emily, when she's ready." Emily sat down slowly on the edge of the bed and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Emily, I've waited my whole life for the right time to tell you this. I prayed I would be around long enough to say it in person. But if not, I hope this letter finds you with the strength to carry the truth. The night you came into my life, I was working the ER floor. They brought in a woman, Sarah Ellis. She was terrified, bleeding, and alone. I was assigned to the neonatal team. They said the baby didn't make it. I believed it, until I heard your first cry. Soft, defiant, alive. There was confusion, then panic. The doctors were distracted. Files were mislabeled, and someone in that hospital wanted Sarah to walk out, believing she'd lost you. I don't know why. I never found out. But I couldn't leave you there. I couldn't let you vanish into a system that didn't even admit you were alive. So I took you home. I forged what I needed. I made it official years later. I don't regret it, not one bit. I raised you with every piece of love I had. But I know that someday, you might want to know where you truly came from. And when you find her, if you find her, I hope she sees what I saw. That you were a miracle. With love, always, Margaret." The letter trembled in Emily's hands, so it was true. Sarah hadn't abandoned her. She had been robbed of her. Emily pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry. Not the sobs of pain, but the soft release of a question that had finally found its answer. When she returned to the hospital that night, Sarah was sleeping again, her breathing even. Emily sat by her side, slipped the folded letter into Sarah's hand and whispered, "She saved me, but you gave me life." Sarah didn't wake, but her fingers curled instinctively around the paper, and Emily knew she'd understand, whether tonight or in the quiet mornings to come. Sarah's recovery was slow but steady. Her speech returned in fragments, halting, incomplete, but full of meaning. Each day, she seemed to come back a little more, as if her soul was stitching itself back together in the quiet presence of her daughter. Emily remained a constant by her side, even when her shifts ended. She brought books, played soft music, and read old poems aloud, some of Margaret's favorites. Sometimes, Sarah would smile faintly when she heard familiar lines. Other times, tears would slide down her cheeks. They hadn't spoken directly about the truth yet, not all of it. But there was something between them now. something bigger than words. One late afternoon, Emily arrived with a small photo album. It was simple, worn from years of flipping. Inside were pictures of birthdays, school dances, scraped knees, science fairs. Moments Margaret had captured on a disposable camera, developed with care, and tucked into pages like tiny treasures. Sarah lay with her head slightly propped up, her eyes following the pages as Emily flipped through them. "This was my 5th birthday," Emily said, pointing to a photo of her covered in cake frosting. "Margaret made the cake herself, vanilla with strawberries. She said I insisted on putting the candles in upside down." Sarah chuckled softly, her voice still weak, but her laughter made Emily's heart ache in the best way. Page after page, they moved through a life lived. A life Sarah had missed, but now she was seeing it through the eyes of someone who had lived it fully. Loved fully. She was a good mother, Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Emily looked up. Sarah was staring at a picture of Margaret in the garden, kneeling beside a tomato plant with a proud grin on her face. "She really was," Emily said. "The best." Sarah blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I tried to fight, but they said you were gone." Emily reached out and took her hand. "I know. They told me not to see. They told me not to hold you." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "I thought I was dying," Sarah continued, her voice growing steadier as she pushed through the pain. "I was alone. And when I woke up, you were gone. They told me you didn't make it." Emily squeezed her hand, not to silence her, but to remind her she was here now, alive, listening. "I looked for you," Sarah said, years later, when I had the strength. I even came back here once, but there was nothing. No name, no trace." Emily leaned closer. "You did everything you could." Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, I gave up." "No," Emily said firmly. "You survived. You lived with a hole in your heart and kept going. That's not giving up. That's what mothers do." Sarah's breath caught, and her fingers curled tighter around Emily's. There were no more words for a while, just the sound of the monitor and 2 hearts trying to heal. Finally, Emily whispered, "I don't need an apology. I just need you to know I'm okay. I had a good life, and now I want you in it." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She nodded, lips trembling. Her voice broke, but her meaning was crystal clear. "Thank you." Emily smiled, blinking away her own tears. She didn't need more than that. Forgiveness didn't always come in grand gestures or long conversations. Sometimes it came in the quiet moments, eyes meeting across silence, hands held without pressure, a photograph shared between generations. Sometimes forgiveness was simply being there. Spring had arrived quietly outside the hospital's windows, painting the trees along the courtyard with soft buds of green. The air smelled different, crisper, as if the world itself had exhaled after a long-held breath. Inside room 614, life was stirring too. Sarah could now sit up for short periods. Her voice had returned, still raspy, but unmistakably hers. The light in her eyes, once clouded by sedation and time, now shone with purpose. Emily came in with a small potted plant, a white orchid Margaret had once said symbolized rare love. She set it on the windowsill with care. "I thought you'd like some company," she said, adjusting the blinds so the sunlight fell gently over the bed. Sarah smiled. "It's beautiful. You're healing fast." Sarah looked at her with a quiet intensity. "Not just my body." Emily sat beside her, unsure how to respond. But she didn't need to. Sarah reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. "I remember the first time I felt you move inside me," she said. "It was the middle of the night. I was lying alone in the dark, and suddenly, there you were, just a flutter. But it changed everything." Emily's throat tightened. "I never forgot that feeling," Sarah continued. "Even when they told me you were gone, I couldn't let go of it. I carried it with me for years. Every flutter, every kick. They were all I had of you." Emily blinked back tears, and I always felt like something was missing, like part of me was waiting for someone to arrive. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of decades shared in quiet understanding. Then Sarah's gaze drifted to the orchid. "She raised you well." "She did," Emily said, smiling. "She gave me everything, and she left a space in her love for you, even though she never met you again." Sarah nodded slowly. "I wish I could thank her. She already knows." Later that afternoon, the hospital chaplain, an older woman with a voice like velvet and the gentlest hands, came by to offer spiritual support. Sarah declined the formal prayer, but asked if she could simply sit with them. So they sat. 3 women. No ceremony, no ritual, just presence. The chaplain looked at Emily and said, "Healing doesn't always come in medicine. Sometimes it begins in a single touch, or a truth finally spoken." Emily thought of Margaret's letter, of Sarah's whisper, of her own hand brushing against skin she never knew was her mother's until it reached back. That was the touch that healed, not the sterile change of a bandage or the careful monitor adjustments, but that moment, the human one, the one that lived outside the charts. That night, Sarah was discharged from the ICU. She'd be transferred to a private rehabilitation facility for physical therapy and extended care. But she insisted she wanted Emily to drive her. As Emily wheeled her out into the late evening light, they passed by nurses and staff who waved and smiled, unaware of the full story. To them, Sarah was a miracle patient, a woman who woke up. But Emily knew better. She wasn't just someone who woke up. She was someone who returned. Before Sarah climbed into the car, she turned to Emily. "I missed your first words," she said. "Your first steps, your first fall, your first heartbreak." Emily looked at her gently. "Then stay. Be here for the next ones." Sarah reached up and cupped her daughter's cheek with the softest, steadiest hand she'd mustered since waking. "I will." And in that moment, no words were needed. The air was thick with the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Emily helped her into the seat, shut the door gently, and walked around to the driver's side. As they pulled away from the hospital, neither of them looked back. They didn't need to, because for the first time, in a long time, both were facing forward. Toward life, toward healing, toward everything still to come. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what part of the story moved you the most. Your voice matters here. See you in the next one.